Madam Mayor, we are live and recording. You can begin whenever you wish.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Welcome everyone to our special council meeting for November 4th. The reason why we're doing this special council meeting is because of a presentation from the consultant who we had contracted some time ago to do some work. So we're going to be getting that the results, and we thought it would take a little bit more time than our regular council meeting would allow. So before we begin, just remind everybody that the meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the Township's YouTube channel. Of course, council, as is always the case, please raise your hand if you would like to speak at all, and I'll call on you at the appropriate time. As well, just a reminder to keep your microphone on or turn your microphone on when you're speaking so that the audio online can pick that up. We'll begin with calling the roll. We've got Deputy Mayor Nelson, Councillor Landsman, Councillor Watt, Councillor Johnston, of course, myself, Mayor Heather Watson, and then a number of staff are joining us who will be introduced at the appropriate time. Of course, I've already stated the reason for our special meeting, but to clarify, it is to allow for a presentation of the Douro-Dummer low carbon plan for the community centers specifically. So moving on, we'll begin with the land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that we are on the lands which are part of the 1818 Treaty 20 and the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe bands of the Great Ojibwe Nation. We offer our gratitude to the Ojibwe for their care and knowledge of the lands on which we work, live, and enjoy. May we honor and respect their teaching and our treaty obligations as we grow together. Moving on, the agenda for this meeting was distributed in advance. I don't believe any disclosure of pecuniary interest has been filed at this point, but if there is any disclosure, now would be the time to declare that. Seeing nothing, just looking for a motion to adopt the agenda this afternoon. It's moved by Councillor Watt, seconded by Councillor Landsman. All in favor? And that motion carries. And then on to our main reason for the meeting today. And we have Catherine Wilson and Mark Maddie. Is that correct? From Enerlife Consulting. Your microphone, please.
Sorry, Catherine was actually sick today, so her colleague Jordan is going to take over the presentation as well.
Okay, wonderful. Well, welcome both from Enerlife Consulting. The floor is yours, folks.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having us. Mark, if you'd like to quickly introduce yourself, followed by Sean, then I can take over.
Sure. I'm Mark Mahdi. I'm a senior energy performance analyst at Enerlife, working on all of these cohort projects related to decarbonization of arenas under the FCM CBR program. Sean, over to you.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Jordan. My name's Sean Mitchinson. I'm an energy analyst here at Enerlife. Just like Mark, working on the decarbonization plans for municipalities throughout Canada, specifically with a focus on hockey arenas and community centers. Thanks.
My name's Jordan Dermo. I'm actually with Simcoe Refrigeration. Simcoe and Enerlife have been partnered for a few years now to conduct these studies on municipal assets, specifically focusing a lot on arenas and curling clubs, the highest emitters typically within a municipal asset profile. So I'm standing in for Catherine. As they said, she had a bit of an emergency today, so I'll be here to provide the overview of the comprehensive GHG reduction feasibility study that we conducted, which was an integral step toward sustainability for your community. So I am just going to share my screen. Oh, are you able to provide me permission to?
I think our clerk is set up here. One moment. Okay, actually, the clerk is going to bring the presentation up and share it on your behalf. So we'll just get that brought up.
Okay.
Okay. We should have
Okay,
that for you.
perfect. Sorry, bear with me. I had changed the order of the slides, so you'll have to. Just want to make sure that I'm matching what you've got on the screen there. Okay. And so we can go to, so there, as you can see, Enerlife as well as Simcoe conducted the GHG reduction feasibility studies on 2 of your municipal assets, the Douro-Dummer Community Center, as well as the Warshaw Community Center, or sorry, the Douro Community Center. So we want to go to the next slide. No. All right. So your community's journey towards decarbonization started about 2 years ago when we successfully submitted an application through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities through the Community Building Retrofit Program. So this grant covered about 80% of the cost for the study. That was $64,488 from the FCM, and the municipality is only going to contribute $16,000 out of pocket. So it was just a good success being able to receive the grant in order to do these comprehensive studies. So the study itself serves as multiple purposes. First, it gives a clear roadmap for what can be done to reduce emissions and improve efficiency while aligning with your capital asset plan. It also provides key supporting documents needed for most grant applications now and in the future. This includes estimated savings both financially and in terms of carbon emissions for each of the measures that were identified. This is going to allow you to stand out amongst other applicants by clearly identifying the intended goals and outcomes of projects and demonstrating the how and why you're choosing to move forward beyond status quo, so beyond just your basic replacements. So these decisions aren't just about today, and that's really important and what we want to try to articulate throughout this study. These are about making choices that will benefit the community for generations to come. Next slide. So the study itself went through different phases. First started with some site visits from both Simcoe as well as Enerlife. Mark and Sean were there. From there, providing energy and building data analysis, reviewing of the drawings, along with information collected at the site visit in order to perform energy balancing and then create an energy model. Then measures were identified. So focusing on optimizing equipment operations up front and then adding in, where heat recovery is possible, as well as renewables. So the overview of the low and no carbon measures are to be implemented over time, which we'll get into in a little bit, using life cycle costing or LCC. RET screen models will be provided, and RET screen models can be used as well for future grant applications. So the final report includes also an implementation timeline, the plan, and it all aligns again with the capital renewal timeline and asset management. And next slide. Perfect. So this is just a quick reminder for why we're doing this. In today's political and economic landscape, it's understandable that carbon reduction and sustainability might feel like it's taken a bit of a backseat, but in reality, climate change isn't waiting. It's the defining issue of our time, and it's challenging every organization, including municipalities like your own, to take urgent action. The science is clear, and if we exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius of warning, there are going to be catastrophic consequences. Despite good intentions and government policies, including ones from municipal facilities, we're at our current pace, we're not set to actually meet these marks. So we need to make sure that municipalities in general are thinking globally, but then acting locally. Every community has a role to play in closing the gap, and these feasibility studies are about understanding what you as a community can do to be a part of the solution. Next slide or page. Perfect. So this is just a list of some general terms that are used within the study, just to make it a little bit easier. So greenhouse gas, GHG. So these are the gases that Earth's atmosphere that these are the gases that are emitted that traps the heat within Earth's atmosphere. So it's essentially the insulation between us and our ozone. When we're talking about carbon dioxide, we're talking about tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So these are just the equivalent to the CO2 emissions that are contributed to climate change. Kilowatt hours per feet. So this is the equivalent kilowatt hours per square foot of the building. It's used for energy intensity. Business as usual, or BAU, is what we're talking about when we're talking about replacing equipment at its end of life. So, and I'll mention this again, regardless as to whether or not you would like to make these change, or sorry, if you'd like to spend money at these facilities, there are pieces of equipment that need to be replaced in order to keep things safe and operational. So we compare replacing with status quo to the other low carbon opportunities. EOL is end of life, and so again, this just matches industry standards and would go based off of when it was originally installed, and then what does the industry standards say for when it should be coming to its end of life. LCP is the low carbon plan. FCM is the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. Some of the big ones I think I'll try to jump to is the net present value, which I have a better explanation in the next page there, which also ties into the ILCC, which is incremental life cycle costing. You've got air source heat pumps, so ASHP. These transfers heat between the outside and inside of buildings, provide efficient heating and cooling. PV is I can't even pronounce that, photovoltaic, which converts light into electricity. So if anyone has kind of questions about the general terms definitions, there are a more comprehensive list that is included in this study, but just to quickly go over for purposes of today. We can move to the next page. All right. So life cycle cost analysis is used because it looks at the total cost of ownership over the next 30 years. So this study is set over the 30-year time frame. We're not just looking at upfront costs or the first replacement cycle. It means that we're accounting for energy, consumption, maintenance, and capital costs. Importantly, what is included is second and sometimes third equipment replacements at their end of life if they fall within this 30-year time frame. To evaluate these costs fairly, net present value, or NPV, is used. NPV converts all future costs and savings into today's dollars, so we can compare options on an equal basis. It factors in things like energy price escalation, carbon costs, capital expenses over time, over the full annual period. This approach ensures that we're not just looking at short-term decisions, but we're making choices that deliver the greatest long-term value for the community, and it aligns with the FCM's requirements for these studies. Next slide. Perfect. So this is a list of the assumptions that were used to calculate the long-term costs and savings in the life cycle cost analysis. So these assumptions were discussed and confirmed during the study's workshops to ensure that they reflect realistic conditions and community's input. With your community's input. They include annual escalation rates for energy and carbon costs, as well as the discount rate for calculating the net present value. And these factors are essential for projecting costs over the next 30 years, and again, are making sure that they're meeting the FCM funding requirements. Next slide. So before we look into the measures, there are a few things to keep in mind. The measures recommended in this study form part of the facility's low carbon pathway and remain valid solutions through to 2056, which is the 30-year timeline that we're looking at. These measures are not mandatory, so you're not locked in to have to put them through, but this is just kind of what you can do to meet some of these targets. So bundles have been put together to show how the community can reach targets outlined in the study. But again, you're not locked in. There are options and just tools to help you plan. The financial analysis includes the net present value, which also factors in, there's one that does not factor this in, and then another one that also shows it, a 20% grant funding, which is available through the FCM's GHG reduction pathway retrofit program. But it's important to keep monitoring for new funding streams, both provincial and federally, as they become available. Another benefit of this study is the ability to plan ahead. So if equipment is nearing the end of life, each early planning and grant applications can allow you guys to be proactive instead of reactive. And the study gives you the tools to prepare for capital expenses and secure funding before the replacement becomes urgent. Go to the next slide. So the first facility we looked at is the Warshaw Community Center. It has a building area of about 22,500 square feet and includes an ice pad, circulation area, change rooms, concession, and a second floor multipurpose room. The main system and equipment includes an ammonia ice plant that's 70 tons, various electric space heaters, propane-fired furnace, and a direct expansion air conditioning. 2 active and inactive electric domestic hot water heaters, plus 1 fuel-fired flood water heater and an electric desiccant dehumidifier. Go to the next one. Perfect. This chart here shows the energy that is used at the Warshaw Community Center. So for electricity, it's the biggest consumer. The biggest consumer is the refrigeration plant, which is listed as cooling. So at 32%, it's followed by heating at 21% and pumps at 17%. For fuel use, space heating accounts for 48%, whereas flood water heating is 36%, and then propane for the ice servicer at 16%. So this breakdown just helps identify where major energy loads are, which is critical for identifying the most impactful measures for reducing emissions. Next slide. So this chart shows how energy is used at the Warshaw Community Center. I'm sorry, I didn't move with you. The key performance indicators at the Warshaw Community Center. So energy use intensity, or EUI, which measures the energy per square foot and helps compare efficiencies against similar facilities. Annual utility costs represents how much you guys are spending each year for those specific things. So for fuel, for propane, for electricity, as well as the annual carbon emissions, which is your facility's footprint. So the total emissions for Warshaw is 50 tons of CO2 annually. In order to meet the 50% target, it would be a reduction of 25 tons and then an 80% reduction down to 10 tons. So these numbers, again, just give a baseline for understanding where you are today and then how much impact the recommended measures could have moving forward. Yeah. So this is budget planning that should be accounted for within the next 5 years. So the flood water heater, which was installed in 2022, it's already being planned for replacement in 2025, which is great. But some other things to consider is the forced flow heaters, which are original, and the domestic hot water heaters, which were installed in 2012, along with the ice resurfacing machine. So just keep in mind kind of some immediate things that are going to have to be looked at are the ones listed here. So then the next slides are a breakdown of the measures provided within the study here. Just note, we don't have the business as usual measures, but they are also highlighted in the study. And again, business as usual aligns with the asset management, when these pieces of equipment need to be replaced, what the year is going to be, and the initial outlay of cost along with the MPV. But then when we're looking at the summary of the low carbon measures, what we can see here is the identification number for each of those measures. A quick brief description, more details are provided actually in the study, along with the typical year, the estimated cost to implement it, the total annual savings, as well as for utilities, as well as the GHG savings, and then the net present value with and without funding. So again, more detail can be found for each of these measures in the actual study, but this just kind of gives an overview of what each of those measures would potentially be saving. So if we look at some just bigger reduction ones, we have the electric floodwater heater, which is slated for 2027. You can see that the initial outlay of cost is about $56,000, but it has a savings of $138 a year, but it also reduces the annual emissions by 4.7. So that's the big takeaway. We want to make sure we're looking at all of these factors, not just the annual utility savings, but how much actual GHG savings. And that is what's used when actually selecting which measure should be focused on. So in this study and in the workshop, some measures that were identified were not put forward in the actual bundle. So it only made sense if the GHG savings as well as the utilities could justify the measures. I'm not sure if we want to go into a lot of detail with the specific summary of measures, or if we can just kind of do the highlight of the bundles.
I think the highlight makes sense. The full reports are also in our agenda package and council's reviewed them. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So we can just go to the next, I think that's more there. Actually, if we pause here for a second, so in 2029, it's indicated to put in for the adoption of solar PV. So while it has a large outlay of costs, the total annual savings is fairly significant, as well as the total tons of GHG emissions. So it's important to keep in mind that when you're combining a lot of these measures, some will offset the others. So that's where the bundles come into play and looking at the kind of cumulative effect. So you can go to the next slide and then one more after that. Perfect. So this slide breaks down the measures by systems. So dehumidification, domestic hot water, heating, cooling, so on. It compares the financial analysis of the low carbon plan against the business as usual. So as you can see, the last two columns show the incremental difference in net present value. So for example, for dehumidification, the NPV for business as usual is slightly better than the low carbon plan without funding. However, when you factor in a 20% grant, the NPV shifts in favor of the low carbon plan. So this pattern will repeat itself through several systems, and while some measures may look less attractive without funding, grant and incentives can significantly improve the financial case. And it's why it's really important to keep monitoring and applying for funding opportunities, because it can turn marginal investments into strong long-term benefits for the community. Go to the next slide. So here is the cash flow comparison. So this chart compares cash flow for the different pathways. So cash in versus cash out over time, where you can see there's large capital expenditures that occur based on each pathway. When you combine those capital costs with annual maintenance, expected savings, and then the low carbon pathways start to trend positively. Whereas the business as usual, which is the gray line there, continues to decline. A couple key milestones to mention in 2029, that's where the implementation of the solar PV is noted, and it creates a noticeable improvement in cash flow. With the CBR funding, the low carbon pathway reaches a break-even point with the BAU. So regardless as to whether or not you're doing the low carbon measures, you're going to be spending this money. And at that point, that is where now you've broken even with the money that you were going to have to spend in order to keep this facility operational. And that comes in around 2040. And without funding, it just occurs a little bit later, around 2044. So towards the end of the timeline, around 2049, you'll also notice another significant expense. This reflects additional equipment replacement based on the industry standards for the end-of-life assumptions. But with proper maintenance, these replacements could be delayed, which would only improve the net present value further. So overall, this chart shows how proactive planning and grant funding can accelerate financial recovery and position the community for long-term savings. Next slide. So this chart compares the projected utility costs under business as usual versus the low carbon pathway. One thing which is certain is electricity, propane, and other fuels will continue to rise over time. Under the business as usual, annual utility costs are projected to climb from around 90,000 today to over 344,000 by 2056. In contrast, the low carbon pathway, which includes efficiency upgrades and solar PV, keeps the annual utility costs steady at about 69,800, even decades from now. And this is really important to keep in mind because this is the freedom that comes with investing in renewable energy and efficiency. The sun's never going to increase its rate, and by reducing our reliance on traditional utility providers, the community gains long-term cost stability and resilience. Next slide. So this slide compares where the facility is today with 3 different pathways that are identified in the study. So the first column shows the current emissions, which is your baseline. And the second line represents the 5-year aggressive pathway. So if you want to make those targets within 5 years, you can actually achieve a 93.9% reduction in emissions. The other 2 are showing after 10 years and after 20 years if you follow the more typical approach. So replacing equipment at the end of life, implementing measures gradually, which is representing a 99% reduction in annual emissions. And then the next page. So this is the incremental analysis. So this table here compares the 2 approaches. Again, business as usual, which is your status quo, and the low carbon plan, so the LCP. Under business as usual, the community, you expect to spend about 1.67 million over the next 30 years just to replace the existing equipment and keep the facility operating. These costs, again, you can't opt out of. They're necessary to maintain the building. Because the BAU does not include efficiency upgrades, we don't expect any GHG reduction or utility savings. That gives us a net present value of about negative 1.25 million. Whereas you compare that to the low carbon plan, which does have a higher initial upfront cost of about just over 3 million, but it significantly reduces emissions and saves an estimated 4.2 million cumulatively for the future utility costs, which improves the NPV to only being negative 953,000. And then if a 20% grant is secured, the NPV improves even further to about negative 405. So in short, while the low carbon plan costs more upfront, it pays back through lower operating costs and positions the community for long-term sustainability. And then we can go to the next slide. Okay. So this is the recommendations are grouped together into bundled, and then how it would be recommended to phase them out over time. So for each phase, what you can see is there's a planning year. This actually indicates when you should start planning. So not necessarily when the projects are due to be implemented, but important to kind of, again, be proactive and look at the available funding and just make sure that you have a really strong plan in order to go forward with grant applications. Sorry, where am I at here? The estimated cost is included for each of those bundles. And then in phase 1, you can actually see, which is in 2027, it delivers a 26% reduction in emissions by bundling all of those selected measures together, which includes major upgrades like refrigeration, envelope, and just other improvements. Later phases, like phase 2, which is 2028, pushes the reduction to 84%. And by phase 3 in 2035, we're approaching a 99% reduction. So this breakdown helps the community plan ahead and prioritize your funding, like I said, as well as spread costs out over time. Go to the next slide. Okay, so next we have the pause for any questions. If there's any.
Council, any questions of our presenter at this point? Nope, nothing further. Carry on, please.
Okay, perfect. So next we have the Douro Community Center. So this facility is about 33,000 square feet. It includes an ice surface, public space, community hall, a second floor multi-purpose room, and kitchen. The main systems include a 70-ton ammonia refrigeration plant, and heating is provided through various electric heaters. You've got some propane-fired infrared bleacher heaters, and there is a propane-fired rooftop unit for cooling. For water heating, the building uses electric domestic hot water heaters and electric floodwater heater. Humidity control is handled by the 2 electric dehumidifiers. We can go to the next slide. So just like Warshaw, this chart shows the end-use breakdown for the Douro Community Center. Cooling and heating are, again, the largest consumers, followed by hot water services. And then on the natural gas side, the majority, about 77%, is used for space heating. So a lot of natural gas is used then to put heat back into the building, whereas we're using a lot of electricity to remove heat from the building. And go to the next slide. So this is again the carbon emissions. So Douro Community Center currently produces about 76.3 tons of CO2 annually. In order to meet the 50% reduction targets, we'd be dropping that to about 38.2 tons. For an 80% reduction, our goal would be to hit 15.3. And again, these targets highlight the scale of change needed to align with deep decarbonization objectives. So we can go to the next slide. So these are just opportunities and budget considerations for the next 5 years. So the arena subfloor is entering its end of life. Those are some capital expenses that should be considered, as well as the domestic hot water heaters, which were installed in 2008. The rooftop units were 2012, and the electric desk and dehumidifier was 2012 as well. Next slide. So just like before, these are a breakdown of the low carbon measures. So you can identify the year of implementation, the initial outlay of cost for those specific measures, the anticipated utility, as well as GHG emission savings, and then the net present value with and without that 20% grant there. So again, more details can be found in the actual study. If you want to jump ahead to the bundles. There we go. So this is the same summary as summary of the bundles as we saw for Warshaw. This chart breaks down the measures by systems, comparing the low carbon plan to business as usual. The key point is that while some bundles look less favorable without funding, applying a 20% grant, and again, other grants should be considered as well, but simply by applying a 20% grant, it shifts most measures into a more favorable outlook using the low carbon plan. So overall, the incremental benefits with funding is about 1.66 million, which reinforces how critical grants and incentives are for making these projects financially feasible. Go to the next slide. All right, so this is the same cash flow comparison for the different pathways over time. You can see the major capital costs and where they occur, and then how the savings start to offset these costs. So other key milestones for Douro Community Center, with the implementation of solar PV in 2029, it creates a noticeable improvement in cash flow. And utilizing a 20% grant, a break even compared to the BAU happens in 2037, whereas without funding, it's pushed to 2041. And there actually is a temporary positive cash flow in 2048. And then we can see a drop, which is reflecting the additional replacements. So again, with proper maintenance, and there's a potential that these replacements would be prolonged, but just using industry standard, this is when they would be identified for a second replacement. So overall, this shows how funding accelerates the recovery, again, and positions you guys for long-term savings. Go to the next slide. Yeah. So the utility cost comparison, and again, same as with Warshaw, the projected utility costs under business as usual versus the low carbon pathway. The BAU costs rise sharply over the next 30 years, reaching more than 538,000 annually by 2056. In contrast, the low carbon pathway, which includes those energy efficient upgrades and solar PV, keeps the cost steady at about 54,000. So once again, demonstrating how investing in renewable and efficiency can provide long-term cost stability. We can go to the next slide. Perfect. So this is again, there you go. Just showing the emissions pathways. So we've got the facility, your current emissions, which are totaling 77 tons annually. Followed by, if you were to go with the 5-year aggressive timeline, and then a typical timeline, what you would be reaching after 10 years, followed by what you'd be reaching after 20 years. So we can go to the next slide there. Right. So this table compares business as usual with the low carbon plan. Under the business as usual, capital costs are about just over 2 million. But we have no emissions reductions and nearly 8.9 million in utility costs cumulative over the next 30 years. The low carbon plan requires an investment of 3.89 million, but cuts emissions by 746 tons cumulatively and reduces the total utility costs by over 7.5 million. So without funding, with funding, the NPV improves to about negative 244 compared to the business as usual, which is going to be negative 1.9. And we can go to the next slide. Perfect. So this is, again, the implementation. So breaking it into phases in order to kind of focus on what would make sense for applying if applications come available for applying, and then just planning those projects. So each phase, again, includes when you should start planning it, which measures are selected for the bundle for this phase, the expected GHG reduction for each phase, as well as the estimated cost with potential grant, as well as a loan aspect. That's only if you're going through the CBR capital grant stream. So that kind of has a little bit more caveat to it, but we include it in the study. For Douro, for phase 1 in 2027, we can actually expect a 22% reduction with the major upgrades like refrigeration as well as envelope improvement. We can go to the next slide. Oh, perfect. So from here, actually, I just want to thank you for taking the time today and including us in your journey for a more sustainable future. We're here to support you every step of the way, from planning and funding to applications and implementation. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask, because Sean and Mark are here. So if you have any technical questions, please put them to the test. And thank you again for letting us be a part of this important work.
Thank you very much, Jordan, for your presentation, particularly last minute stepping in on Catherine's behalf. I'm sure getting up to speed can be a bit of a challenge last minute. Council, over to you. Any questions of Jordan or the team from Enerlife Consulting? Councillor Johnston.
Yeah, the question I have is that a lot of it you're recommending to go to electric. Am I right to say that? On the mechanical stuff?
Sorry, Jordan.
No, feel free, Sean, please.
Yes, these are unique facilities in the sense compared to a lot of the other facilities that we deal with, in the sense that if you remember from the slide deck, most of the energy consumption at these facilities is already electric, served by baseboard heaters. There's not too much fossil fuel consumption at the facilities to be transitioned away from. But yes, the short answer is yes, we're looking to electrify, move away from fossil fuels to decarbonize.
My only concern is that the price of electric is, as far as being feasible to run these arenas, the electric is very, very, very expensive. The other fuels can be expensive, but I think the electric one in the big picture, like going with where you have one spot they're going with the heat pump and that. I mean, it all sounds good, but it's very expensive to operate. That's all I'm saying.
Sorry,
On that?
it's important to take all that into consideration. Heat pumps in general are actually going to reduce electrical consumption. They have much higher COP when it comes to kind of energy in versus energy out. But it's also important to look at the bundles and the packages as a whole. So that's where solar PV implementation really comes into play to help offset those electrical, like just the electrical consumption and the cost in general.
And just to add here also that the life cycle costing analysis do include all of the additional costs coming from the electricity use along with the escalation. So this is all factored in, but still this is like the only way for us to decarbonize. There's no way of reducing significantly carbon emission without shifting the fuel. And we totally get it, and you're absolutely right. The rates do not still reflect like the advantage to a certain extent. However, with more efficient equipment, as Jordan mentioned, like the air source heat pump, which have typically efficiencies above 3 compared to electricity use, direct electricity use, that would help the business case, if that makes sense.
And one last item to add is just another thing making these facilities unique from maybe a lot of people's homes is there's no Enbridge gas lines running right to the facility, which comes with lower costs. There's no denying electricity is more expensive than the fuel oil or the propane used at these facilities. But because it's not piped directly to the facilities, the rates per unit of energy are marginally higher than you might expect for typical natural gas because there's additional delivery fees, etc. And I know, not to get too much into the asset management, but one additional example is the fuel tank. So at the, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, the Warsaw Community Center, there's a fuel oil water heater, and the storage tank for the fuel oil needs to be replaced in the coming years as well. So like Mark mentioned, the life cycle cost analysis takes into account these various components, replacing the fuel oil tank, electrical upgrades for that water heater, etc.
Council, any further questions? Deputy Mayor Nelson, please don't forget to use your microphone.
Thanks a lot for your presentation. Just a question more on what my colleague has talked about the electrical compared to propane. I thought maybe you were looking at changing more to propane, but that's not the case. It's more towards electrical. And so you're talking about solar systems to install more solar systems to reduce reliance on hydro. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. So actually, if you want to summarize the categories of measures, some of them we call low-hanging fruits and zero or low-cost measures. These are more operationals, like having proper setbacks, proper scheduling for the facilities. These do not cost much, but have significant savings. And there are the more capital-intensive measures that we're recommending, and typically they shift the fuel source from gas and propane and fuel oil to electricity.
So just a further question on that. Has the replacement cost, when, for example, when you switch to electric or we switch to something else, has that been added into the cost of replacement down the road as well? Has that figure been figured into? Do you understand what I'm saying? Like
Yes, and that
again, and say 30 years or the replacement of that equipment again, is that in this study as well?
right. That's a great question. So typically, yes, whenever we're doing life cycle costing analysis over a certain specified period, in this case, which is mandated by the CBR program, which is, I think, 30 years. So we factor in all of the costs that goes within this 30 years. So your maintenance costs, escalation cost of utilities, replacement cost of equipment, and all of the savings are all factored in this 30 year. Even correct me if I'm wrong, Sean, even the salvage value of the equipment at the end of the 30 years.
So when I look at the graph, I'll kind of bring it back up there, the one that's by replacing all of our equipment and doing what you suggested that we do, the cost is $54,381 on that graph, the bottom line. And the other top line is $538,959. I just find that very hard to believe that you can actually tell us that's the amount of money after we do all this replacement costs, and to go out that far to 2056 is when the graph ends. I just find that number staggering to believe that that is what the cost would be. That's my thoughts. It doesn't even make sense. We know that everything stays kind of comparable. There might be a difference between electricity and there might be a difference between, no difference than right now. When I look at the cost of propane and when I look at the cost of electricity, and then I put that out, I can change all the equipment I want in my house or my building. But when I put that out, I find your numbers unbelievable, to be honest with you. I just don't see them numbers being very true. Sorry,
So,
that's just my thoughts.
so are we referring to the utility cost chart, this one that we're seeing on the screen, or the cash flow comparison? Which one?
Is this the chart that we're referring to that's on screen?
Yes, that's the chart I'm referring to. Sorry. Yeah, the
So-
utility cost comparison. Yeah.
Yes, so that's a yearly utility cost comparison. That's not aggregate from year to year. So on every year of this chart, you see what you would be paying at that year, including the escalation. That's why you see this business as usual utility cost going up, because we're starting from already a point which is like high. It's around 120. I think we saw that the current utility cost is around 120K. And you see when we start implementing decarbonization measures and solar PVs, which offset lots of these utility costs, your base utility consumption at 2030 goes probably towards 25K. And then it starts ramping up with escalation similar to the business as usual case. And that's what's creating the gap. All of these efficiency measures, which now consumes less utilities and electricity, have at the end a net effect which is significant. So you see, you're right that, I mean, doesn't seem very straightforward, but this is the case. And we have the details of every component of the study that shows you that at the end, by 2056, based on the current escalation rates that Jordan included in the presentation, so what we consider, I think, 3% or 2% escalation rates, you would, in 2056, if you would have the business as usual, you would be paying $540,000 in terms of utilities versus the 55,000, which is tremendous.
Mhm.
So, oh, sorry, after you, Jordan.
I was just going to add a little bit more caveat to that, and I might be taking a line that you're most likely going to say, Sean, is that we can't predict the future and we can't predict the future costs. All you can do is make the best guess based on those assumptions that Mark was talking about. So the annual escalation rate for just utility costs in general, and so that's where that annual number kind of comes into play, is looking at over 30 years. If it goes up by 3% every single year, what is that end rate there? And it does seem like an astronomical number, but again, we can't really predict the future, but also think how much more economical was hydro and natural gas 30 years ago compared to what it is today.
But
So I think
just another point to that though, but we got over a $3 million investment to try and get to $55,000 a year, correct?
I believe what we're looking at, just correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just trying to move forward in the essence of time because we do have another meeting at 5:00. This is just the utility cost. This doesn't factor in the actual equipment costs. So to your first part of the question, Deputy Mayor, whether or not they were factoring in all replacement and maintenance,
Yeah.
that's not, this graph doesn't show those actual hardware maintenance costs. It's just the hydro bills that we would be getting.
Yeah.
Is that correct, Jordan?
Mhm. Yeah, this is just
Mark, you
the
just-
utility rate escalations.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any further questions from council? No? Oh, Councillor
Well,
Johnson.
I guess to the chair. The only other question I got is that where do we go from here?
Well, at this point, where we'd be just basically looking for a motion to receive. This is closing off the 2-year project that was started in late 2023. And then this will kind of factor in potentially to any replacement needs that we have. We're also in the process of doing our asset management plan, costing. And I, our consultants are not necessarily aware of this, development of the floor replacement in the Douro Community Center, which we're already kind of ahead of the game based on what the report recommendations are as it relates to that equipment replacement. So I think at this point, we're just looking for a motion to receive, and then staff will bring forward, potential plans for replacement down the road.
Received, but thanks.
Okay, Councillor Johnson will make that motion, and that will be seconded by Councillor Landsman. All in favor? And that motion carries. Thank you very much. And again, Jordan, Mark, and Sean, thank you all for your time and your work on the file. Moving ahead, we're just looking for a motion on the confirming bylaw. Councillor Watt, seconded by Deputy Mayor Nelson. All in favor? And that motion carries. And lastly, just a motion to adjourn before we resume our 5 o'clock meeting. Councillor Landsman, seconded by Councillor Johnston. All in favor? And that motion carries. Great. We'll be back in 10 minutes. Thank you, everyone.